يخشون أحدا إلا الله ولا يخشون أحدا إلا الله وكفى بالله وكيلا. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا وسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. هو الذي يصلي عليكم وملائكته ليخرجكم من الظلمات إلى النور. وكان بالمؤمنين رحيما. وكان بالمؤمنين رحيما. تحيتهم يوم يلقونه سلام وأعد لهم أجرا كريما. يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا. وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا. وبشر المؤمنين. وبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا. وبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا. ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين ودع أذاهم وتوكل على الله وكفى بالله وكيلا. صدق الله العظيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير صدق الله العظيم.
جزاكم الله خيرا سيف، ما شاء الله تلاوة جميلة ما شاء الله، بارك الله. شيخ طارق الوائل ولا حكى؟ تفضل.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. Dr. Meraj is running, it's a little bit late, he'll be here soon, inshallah sooner than later. And tonight's program began with recitation, the Quran. And the Quran is best understood through the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, to us, the Prophet is not the center of the religion. The Quran is. And the Quran is Kalamullah, is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is the role of the Prophet ﷺ? The Prophet is the observable, physical, tangible, studyable manifestation of the Quran. As Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, Kana Qur'anan yamshi. He was a walking Quran. Now obviously that means his character reflected the Quran. His actions reflected the Quran. His style reflected the Quran. The most pristine understanding of the Quran is the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And so the more we acquaint ourselves with him, with his persona, with his actions, then by default the closer we are to the Quran and the proper understanding of the Quran. And today we really want to zero in on a particular question that I think is so important but lost from between the Muslims. And with all that's going on today, this right here, if you can master this, and you could, if you can master this, you are creating for yourself a shield against all the nonsense going on in the world today. And I'm not just talking about LGBT. I'm also talking about within marriage. I'm also talking about within family, within business, and anybody who's on social media, who scrolls through these shorts, you cannot but feel a sense of overload. I'm listening to this person, they're telling me X, Y, and Z. And another person says, no, 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 don't, X, Y, and Z is all wrong, A, B, C. And a third person says, oh, both of them are wrong, it's this way. And then you're sitting between all of this saying, well, what do I do? Literally, if you want to feel what it means to be lost, just sit on social media and listen to people. And so we need to master the following question. We need to make it part of our lives. And that is, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? If you can intertwine this in your mind, in your heart, if you can constantly ask this question, then the shield comes. Why? Because we know for sure what the Prophet did ﷺ is huda, is guidance. We know that this is correct. We know that this is the right understanding of the religion. And you could do it easier than you think. And anybody who has some knowledge of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they heard a hadith there, they heard a story of the Prophet there. How do you channel that to where it becomes part of your life? And the answer is by asking this question: what would the Prophet ﷺ do? My child, and I have another one coming, alhamdulillah, they're young. And so what's on my mind, my primary concern is, how do I raise these kids? And so I buy book after book after, and I read and I read and I read. And you all know I focus a lot on family. And then once I was sitting there looking at all these books, and among these books is the book Revelation by Dr. Meraj. Revelation. And something just struck me. I am trying to I'm reading all these books. Why? So I can be a better parent. Well, who's a better parent than the Prophet ﷺ? So I can just take the shortcut, summarize everything by doing what? Learning his life. And just to show you how powerful this is, mastering the life of the Prophet and incorporating in your own life. Think of the following. Remember when COVID first started and the hospitals were being overrun? And now these doctors, they were under a tremendous amount of stress. We all have doctors in the family. I'm sure you heard the stories. And these doctors are extremely distressed. Why? Because there's not enough ventilators. And now they have to choose. Who do I choose? Do I choose person A or person B? One of them is going to die based on what I choose. And so a lot of these physicians, they developed a type of anxiety that was overpowering, because no matter how they looked at it, it was always, I led to the death of somebody because I chose somebody else. But for the Muslim who asked the question, well, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? Here's Dr. Meraj. If someone can get him a chair, please. Put it over here, please. If a physician in this moment asked the question, what would the Prophet do, alayhi salatu wasalam? And he knows, and he has a story, and he has the principle. And he says, you know what? If the Prophet was here, I believe he would choose person A to give the ventilator to, and not person B. What would that do to you, to that doctor in that position? This is serious stuff. So what would the Prophet ﷺ do? And I welcome once again, for those who aren't already familiar with Dr. Meraj. Dr. Meraj is the author of the book Revelation, the story of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Maybe, perhaps, probably the best English book of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. If you don't have it, I recommend that you do get it. It's been a blast. And so, Dr. Meraj, I opened up this discussion by asking, trying to show people how important it is to have this question on the mind constantly. What would the Prophet ﷺ do? And I gave him, and you're a physician, so he probably knows this better than anybody. I referenced when COVID first started and the hospitals were getting overwhelmed, and then the ventilators there was a shortage. Now doctors have to choose. Do I give the ventilator to this person or that person? One of them is going to die, right? And so the stress that it must have the stress on these physicians. But I said, what if you knew what the Prophet would do? and you made the choice based on what the Prophet ﷺ would do, how would that change the entire dynamic and how you felt? So I'm going to pass it over to you to continue the conversation.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I'm late coming from the hospital. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. This is amazing. I'm just so amazed. I just moved here recently, and I'm just like so, mashallah, amazed by the community that alhamdulillah, the leadership is building. Because like on a Friday night to see this many people coming and talking about the Prophet Islam means that there's something beautiful in the community, alhamdulillah. So, that's a big question. But yesterday we were sitting next to each other and we were talking about this topic, and I'm thinking that's a pretty heavy. I mean, that's like the heaviest question. Like, who do you pass a ventilator to, right? Taking a step back, it was on my mind. I was this idea of what would the Prophet do as an introduction. I was listening to a lecture by a sister up in the Bay Area, who. I don't know if many of you know her, and I know her family's here. Her name is Hina Khan. Are any of you familiar with her? Because I know her sons are here and so forth. And she gave a really interesting talk on how to raise strong Muslim adults. She's really into parenting and so forth. And one of the things that she said, that is, she gives this, I highly recommend you listen to this talk. It's on YouTube. The top 10 things she did after interviewing all these people about, she'd see an amazing person, a young person, and she would ask the parents, what do you do? What are you doing? What are you doing? And so she did this informal survey over years. And the one thing, all 10 are fascinating, and I kind of like actually wrote them down. I try to keep track of them. But one of the things that she said, which is very powerful, which I'll always remember, she said, I noticed that in the families where the children exhibited kind of like, you see a kid and like, mashallah, that kid is, the parents, what are they doing? And she said, I noticed that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was like a family member in their house. And that really struck me. Like, it was not like this, it wasn't like Abraham Lincoln, where it's kind of like, oh, we celebrate Abraham Lincoln as Americans on Independence Day or July. It's not like this, oh, it's his birth and we kind of bring him into the house. He's always there because he's at the dinner table. Because you're like, oh, let's do this. Oh, you know what? Let's share a plate today. You're creating this culture where he is always the other person in the family. So the kids are always like, what would the Prophet say? What would he do? Oh, the Prophet did this, or you're kind of competing with each other, and you're having this family culture where he is there at all times. And so even before we go to ventilators and decisions on who survives and who passes, taking a step back to like just the idea of keeping it very active in your mind, that you're always turning to that example. I just wanted to, it was just on my mind as I was driving here, and I want to mention that as just from bare bones, because we can talk about extreme examples like that, but the reality is most of us don't deal with those extreme examples. But we deal with examples that are incredibly consequential that maybe we can talk about and kind of get into modeling.
Definitely, and this reminds me of a moment in the life of the Prophet ﷺ that really can highlight this important question: what would the Prophet do? Well, what happens when we don't follow the Prophet ﷺ? Here we have an expert who conducted surveys across a period of time to try and understand how do you successfully, as parents, raise kids. And we find that amongst all of these families, the Prophet ﷺ was part of the family. He was the role model. They asked the question, what would he do? To really kind of to motivate us to implement this. Well, what happens when we don't follow the Prophet ﷺ? Well, what happened in the Battle of Uhud? Well, the defeat of Uhud, Allah literally points out why it happened. Everything was going better than planned. Imagine, victory is literally in your fingertips. It's right there. And the companion said, we saw the Quraysh throwing their swords and their weapons, and they were bolting. They just ran. And the Muslims started to clean up after the battle. And then a group of those Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ told them, and we're familiar with the story, stay on that hill and don't come down until I tell you to come down. And what did they do? They didn't listen. And they came down before the Prophet ﷺ told them to come down. Now, in all fairness, they saw the battle was over. But still, the Prophet was very clear. He was explicit. Don't come down until I tell you to come down. They disobeyed. And they went down. And in a moment, that victory turned into a defeat. In a moment, like that, snap. And Allah says, the reason why? Because you disobeyed. That's what happened. It's a lesson. Allah wanted it to happen so that we have a model. When we disobey the Prophet ﷺ, what happens? Tragedy happens. Now, we don't have to be very extreme. I'm just kind of giving you a model. The idea is, if I don't obey the Prophet ﷺ, Allah says, فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبُهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Be careful. Allah cautions those who intentionally disobey the Prophet ﷺ that there are consequences to that. In another verse, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. Whatever the Prophet tells you to do, do it. When the Prophet says don't do something, don't do it. Be conscious of Allah and know that consequences can be severe. So you have to be careful in this regard. Obedience to the Prophet ﷺ is an obligation, mentioned over 60 times in the Quran. Yeah, we often find Muslims sitting there bickering over this or that, and the hadith, and can we trust hadith and all of this stuff. Man, this is so essential. Why? Because he was sent for what reason? You know what? As somebody who has been studying the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, why was he sent? Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just send a book or send an angel? Why a prophet? And prophets in general. What is their role, their function in our lives?
So the interesting thing is that if you look at the time of Mecca, and if you look in Medina, right? The people were living in a paradigm. Like you gave the example of Uhud right now, right? So don't think about archers and mountains. Just think about like what's happening from a psychological perspective. You have a bunch of people who are living in a paradigm that when a battle is over, the paradigm in Arabia is when the battle is over, what do you do? What do you do? Go get the stuff. Like why would you leave money on the table? That's how we say it now, like right? Like the business has been sold. Go get the stuff. Now's the time. You worked hard, you deserve it. So the paradigm in Arabia at that time is like it makes sense. It's actually silly to leave the booty just lying on the ground. Go for it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the Arabs of the time, the archers, they're just doing what the cultural paradigm is. The archers are just following the contemporary, natural paradigm, which is the battle is over, I worked hard, I deserve what's on the ground there, let me go get mine. You understand what I'm saying? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, don't do that. Don't follow the paradigm, because I'm giving you something better than the paradigm. Does that make sense? So don't think about battles. Just think about like, when you say, what is the point of prophets, right? If you look at all the prophets, what are they saying? They come with the same message. I'm giving you this thing, and I am not, what do they all say? I'm not asking anything from you. Like every prophet and so many sources, I'm giving you this, I'm not asking anything of you. They are on their hands and knees begging you to see the reality of the society that you live in, whether that society is in Mesopotamia at the time of Nuh al-Islam, whether that society is in Egypt at the time of Musa al-Islam, whether that society is in Arabia at the time of the Prophet Islam. All of these prophets are doing the same thing. And Isa al-Islam, like if you were talking about someone who's talking about shaking a paradigm, Isa al-Islam is coming to Bani Israel and saying, You guys have it all wrong. You are following the rules, but you are not following the spirit of your faith. So it's all lost. So he's literally trying to shake these people and be like, you need to start seeing reality for what it is. And you can feel the desperation in Isa alayhi salam. You can feel the desperation in the Prophet Islam. He's like aching for people to just get it together. So they're not chasing, I'm going to use the popular word now, the matrix. Do you understand when I'm saying the matrix? Many of you understand that, right? Like, for those of you who are familiar with the matrix and so forth, you are just like in this sea of whatever. Now, I'll give you a practical example of this because we're talking about personal stories. So I thought I would give a personal story of what would the Prophet do? Because it's easy to get dramatic about battles and this and that, but I'm not fighting in battles right now. But I'm dealing with my own issues, my own struggles as a dad. So this was very powerful about what the Prophet Islam would do. And I call these like digging deep into the seerah to find the super sunnahs. Not the sunnah. The sunnahs are like this and, clipping your nails. That's all like easy, documented, kind of, you can just bullet journal that stuff. Check, 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 I did these. I'm talking about the deep sunnahs of like his way of being. So I'll tell you something which this made me cry. And it made a close family member of mine cry. I had a family member of mine. He called me, and he was saying, he lives in Chicago, and he's about my age, kids, divorced, like many people are, single parent for half the week. It's a very difficult struggle. And he's like just trying to get through life, pay his bills, deal with his ex-wife and co-parenting and all that kind of stuff. And he confided in me. He says, I feel just like I'm not the person I thought I would be. I thought at this point, this is not what I signed up for. I thought by this point in my life I would have achieved this and I would have become a professor, and I'm not. I'm not even active in the masjid. I'm barely I'm just happy if I go to Jummah. Like, I'm not going late night to the masjid for salah. I'm not doing any of that stuff. I'm just trying to survive. And I am not the person who I anticipated I was going to be. And that's like a very common complaint. I feel that way. I'm sure a lot of us feel that way. Now, this is very powerful, and this is a lesson from the seerah. And I told him this just because I happened to listen to this earlier that month. And it was very powerful, and it kind of changed my approach to how I live. And I was listening to a scholar, and when you talk about practical applications of the seerah, by the way, I think Sheikh Abdul Nasir Jangda, for those of you who know his series, it's a very powerful series on the seerah, especially in how to apply it to your everyday life. And here's an example that he gives talking about other scholars. He says, when you talk about the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know some stories from his early childhood, right? We know the stories of how he went with Halima to the desert and they opened his chest. Then we know some stories from his teens. And we know a couple stories from his 20s. But when it gets to his 30s, the only story we really have is a story of when they're arguing, right, in the haram, and they're like, oh, Al-Amin walks in the door and he helps them, right? We know the story of the Hajar al-Aswad, right, the black stone. There's only one story from his 30s. And then once he becomes a prophet of Islam, then you start seeing, okay, the stories start starting because now he's producing and now he's... And he says, what the scholars say about this is the reason we don't know a lot about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his 30s is because what was he doing at the time? He had 4 daughters. He was committed to going to work enough to support his wife and kids, and he was committed to his household. He was not a community leader. He was not trying to be on the shura board. He was not trying to gain votes and to push this and to get influence and to be popular. He was very intensely focused on raising his little kids. Right? When I told this to my family member, they started crying on the phone. And I started crying on the phone. Because the paradigm that we live in, just like the paradigm, we talked about the paradigm of the archers rushing for the booty. The paradigm that we live in as men, I can speak as a man, I can't speak for women, but I'm sure it's similar, is that we have to be up to something at all times. Like we have to be like flexing and influencing and producing and earning and on this this economic like mill to keep churning out and to keep getting higher and higher in your career and so forth. Not that there's anything wrong with being ambitious, but even that's the paradigm. Like who says that's the right way to do it? Just because Western culture says you should work like crazy and not take any vacation, and you only see your kids at dinner, if you do have dinner as a family, from 7 to 7:30, and then you fall asleep, that's just a random paradigm that this world has come up with, right? Both parents are working, kids don't get to see their parents a lot, and we're all just like, if you don't know any better, you're just gonna follow that paradigm. Just like Bani Israel doesn't know any better, so they're worshiping other gods, right? Just like the people on Nuh alayhi salam's time don't know any better, so they're just following the tales of long ago. We're following the tales of long ago. These are our tales. This is what our forefathers did. They all hustled and we worked hard. And so what the Prophet ﷺ is doing, and this is one example of the seerah, I found this for me personally very liberating. To finally stop, and even like my father, who's a physician, you know, he's an immigrant. So as an immigrant, he came to America and it was like, go, go, go. This is the land of opportunity. Just seize the opportunity. So even as an immigrant, it's hard because I've been trained to be like, go, 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 and you have to get higher and just climb, 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 and earn, earn, earn. But even I have to question my father's paradigm. Not that it's a bad paradigm, but I think maybe it could be better. Do you understand where I'm going with this? And so I'm suggesting as one example, which is very real world, in that when we look at the amount of time we give to our families, when the Prophet ﷺ became 40, it was go time. He didn't have time to mess around. He didn't have time to now fix the fact that, God forbid, Ruqayya, one of his daughters, Ruqayya, Sayyidina Kulthum, or whoever, that they had attitude issues, or they were back-talking now. Because that's going to take away from the time that he's actually now going to make a difference in the community. But if he didn't lay that groundwork early, like with Sayyidina Ali and so forth, Sayyidina Ali would not have been the kid who is like, I will support you when Abu Lahab is making fun of him, right? Like these great stories that we hear about the people who were around the Prophet ﷺ, it wasn't like random that it happened. It happened because he put the time in early on and was not like devoted to his career because he was all about family, so that when it came time to actually be the man he needed to be, the family system was like intact. So that's just one example where I consider that like a super sunnah. There's no sunnah that says, oh, the Prophet ﷺ narrated that. In your 20s you must. But when you start looking at the patterns in the seerah and why these prophets were sent, they were sent as a model. He didn't tell us to do that. But when you start reading between the lines, you're like, I want that success. Then you gotta do what the coach did. You can't just like watch the coach and admire the coach. You won't get the benefits of the coach if you don't do the workout that the coach is telling you to do.
You know, this is absolutely golden for the youth here, or maybe everybody, when they analyze Jeff Bezos, right, Mark Zuckerberg, and these guys, they analyze them. What are they doing? How are they so successful? And they give you like this list of they all do these things. They're up at 4:45, at 4:30 a.m. And Mike Wahlberg apparently gets up at 2 a.m. That's the start of his day to go and work out. And it just one thing after another. It's routine, ultimate routine, where there's not a single second where they spare, right? And as somebody who's trying to do, anybody who has ambition will easily get caught in this paradigm. And now if you have a family, you have children, it's like they're in the way now. But just the other day, I'm reading this book called The Boy Crisis. It looks at why are boys struggling in the West. It's not even a Western problem, it's a global problem, by the way. And one of the things this individual mentions is that the routine, right? The routine that needs to happen is X, Y, and Z. Right? And that if you want to be a great person who makes a difference, then you have to sacrifice the family. And he literally says this. It's in bold in his book. And I sit and I think, The Prophet ﷺ literally changed the trajectory of the world, yet it never took away time from his family. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, there is something off. And you just presented it in a way I never kind of put it together. The paradigm is wrong. And that's why you need the Prophet. The Prophet was sent. Why? So that we have a model to make our lives simpler. Have you ever seen somebody on a diet who literally has a weighing scale with them? I've seen this. I'm not trying to insult or make fun of anybody, right? Diet is a diet. There's science behind it. I'm sitting there thinking, and as one person put it, you know, how long are we going to sit there calculating our calories? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a world, a system that's meant to take care of most of your necessities. يا ابن آدم خلقتك للعبادة فلا تلعب وقسمت لك رزقك فلا تتعب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this narration, it's not part of the hadith tradition, but it's something that the scholars have referenced. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is narrated as saying, O child of Adam, I created you to worship me, so don't fool around. And I will take care of your provisions. So don't overburden yourself. Right? The way our body is created is meant to take care of itself. Just be moderate in what you consume and how much you consume. That's it. Why? So that we focus on the more important task, and that is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we get stuck in this paradigm, the Prophet ﷺ and the prophets become this way out by simply asking, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? Abdurrahman bin Auf, Zubair ibn Awwam, Uthman ibn Affan, these three individuals, and I've said this before to the community, these three individuals in our time today would be multi-billionaires. Multi-billionaires. Uthman would recite the entire Quran every single day. That takes at least 5 hours. In our current paradigm, you're wasting time. You gotta work. You gotta work. Money was coming to him left and right. He worked, right? And he was smart at what he did, obviously. But he didn't kill himself over it. And so we have the prophets. Why? As Allah says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. We sent messengers so that they are followed. Not so that we just celebrate them. Right? Oh, we have this guy who's cool, and alayhi salatu wasalam, we name our children after them. No, they're meant to be followed. Why? So that when the world is going left and right, you have the two extremes, and that's the only narratives that you'll find on social media. You can avoid all of that by simply asking, what would the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam do? And when that's the paradigm, by the way, it gives you strength. Another reason why the prophets were sent, and what you will gain when you ask the question, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? By the way, we're going to do Isha at 8:15, so please do bear with us so that we don't kind of break the talk into two. One of the core benefits of knowing the prophets is that it gives us firmness of heart. وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. We tell you all these stories so that your heart is strong. And I'll give you an example. All the parents here have experienced this. You're praying, and your little son is jumping from the bed or the couch onto your back. You go into sujood, opportunity, slide. And you're trying to focus on salah, and you think the child is getting in my way, and I can't do salah properly, I can't focus. And sometimes here in the masjid, you have a little one running back and forth. He's having a time of his life, and somebody gets mad. We can't concentrate. Well, stop for a second and ask yourself, what would the Prophet do? And so when I'm in ruku' and sujood and my son is jumping on me, I remember when Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhum would jump on the Prophet's back while leading salah with a group of people. And he would not get up from sujood until his grandchild got off of his back. Imagine that. Now, when you think that way, instead of getting mad, frustrated, how do I deal with this? And you yell and you lash out, and the child's like, what? I was just playing. And when the child's mind's like, why is my dad mad at me? Or my mother mad at me? What did I do wrong? What I'm doing, I'm having fun. It creates a type of break, a disconnect in the child's mind. But when we say, what would the Prophet do? The child is happy. You're happy in that you are experiencing a moment similar to what the Prophet ﷺ experienced. What would the Prophet ﷺ do? You're going through difficulties. You need to make a decision. Or you're looking at all the opportunities out there. You want to get rich. You want to get into real estate. You want to get into business. It almost always starts with what? A loan, a conventional loan. And now you feel like you have a type of dilemma. What do I do? Well, you ask yourself the question, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? And no matter what the decision you make, right? If I feel this is what the Prophet ﷺ would have done, I did the research, I asked the questions, I know of an incident, that's going to make you feel confident. It's going to make you feel content. I did the right thing. But when you're left to yourself and you're trying to calculate, and there'll always be a time period, an amount of uncertainty. I don't know if I did the right thing. What if that was the right thing? Well, if I know this is what the Prophet ﷺ would have done, then I'm content with that. See how it simplifies your life. Everybody's screaming left and right. This is good, this is bad, this is good. And you could avoid all of that noise by simply asking the question, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? I keep repeating it. I want to drill it in your mind so that, inshallah, you can leave away with that. And, something very important is that the Quran is clear. You cannot love Allah, nor will Allah love you until this man becomes your center. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. If you truly love Allah, you will follow this Prophet. And Allah will reward you for following him by getting his love. So, in this realm of the emotional side of, our spiritual side, when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, how can we navigate that, especially in a time where spirituality is becoming increasingly popular?
I wanted to touch on one thing because I think this is important because we're talking about we should ask ourselves what would the Prophet Islam do? But the question is you should first ask yourself, do I really care what the Prophet Islam would want to do? We can all say, what would he do? And we know we should. It's like kind of what would my dad do? We have this kind of obligatory question that we should ask ourselves. But the question is what would he do? And so I wanted to just take a second here to be, if you look at some of the people who are the most inspiring people to me, if you look at the companions, for example, remember, every single companion was a convert. Okay? They came from one paradigm, and then they actively took a moment in their life to say, no, I've seen this paradigm didn't work for me, that system didn't work for me. They recognized the beauty of the system, they recognized the simplicity of the system, and they were all in on the system, right? That's why even in this day and age, when I talk to converts, when I learn from converts, there is a certain clarity of thought and passion in their voice, which is very palpable. And I'm sure a lot of you can appreciate that. And the reason why is because they actively made a choice to leave and drop what they knew and clung to. And they did this hisab, this measuring. I could go with Catholicism or this, or forget about religion. I could go with utilitarianism, which is I'm just gonna work for me, I'm not gonna have kids because that's just a waste of money. Whatever the mentality is, liberalism, secular, they're trying different things. And then when they stumble on Islam, they're yes, this is absolutely correct. And the conviction that they have is because they're comparing it to other systems that they've tried and failed. So it comes with a conviction that you don't have to tell them, brother, you should ask yourself, what would the Prophet do? They're dude, that's all I do. How many of you have fallen into a sport where this is the best sport ever, or this is the best hobby, and you can't stop thinking about it, right? Oh, I can't wait to knit this tomorrow, or you're you're so into it because you've tried a lot of different things, and this fits. It feels right. There's a feeling of rightness. And what I want to put out to all of you is that it's challenging as a person born into Islam to have your conversion moment, but I urge you to have that moment. Because we're all kind of like swirling around Islam and the Prophet Islam, kind of one foot in, one foot out, and you don't get the full benefit of the workout unless both feet are in the gym. You can't kind of just be like wearing the outfit and walking around the equipment, but not actually doing like the curls. You don't get the pump. You don't get the thing. You have to actually start sweating. At some point, you have to decide: am I in this gym, or am I going to be just kind of like circling the parking lot, trying to feel good because I'm wearing the right clothes? And that's what we as Muslims do, who are born into Islam. Whereas other people who convert, they open both doors, sign me up, and they're like, they don't care if they look silly. They have their towel and their water, and they're working out. They're like, I've tried 10 other gyms. This is it. Coach is here. I'm following this coach. And what I'm urging you to do, when we talk about what would the Prophet Islam do, we have to take a step back and be like, do you really buy it? Like wholeheartedly, have you truly had your conversion moment where you're like, I'm in it? Okay, I'll give you an example. Yesterday at the event, someone asked me what was my favorite story of the Sirah, and I said something, and then I was so upset because like I have other stories that I like more, and then I have other stories I like more. One of my favorite stories of the Sirah, and I imagine it relates to a lot of you. It probably relates to me a lot because of my background. I'm not even Arab, right? I'm like Desi, like Indian background. One of my favorite stories is because we are so far away from the Prophet Islam, but I want to be so close to him, but I can't reach him because I'm 1,400 years away. How do I get close to him? Well, we actually have a story of how someone who's far away got close to the Prophet Islam, and that's in the story of Salman al-Farsi, right? And it's one of my favorite stories. Real quickly, Salman al-Farsi, born in Persia to a Zoroastrian family. A Zoroastrian family, they have their own like duality worship kind of system. And he's like, I don't know if I'm really having this right now. He's fighting the paradigm. And he's like, I want to do Christianity. He tells his parents get really upset. They disown him. He goes with a monk. He's hanging out there in Persia. And then like he ends up getting pulled to Syria. He like gets traded to another monk. And he's just being like moved around. And he's trying to find the truth. Okay? We love stories of people trying to find the truth. That's why like the greatest Muslim American, I believe, is Malcolm X. Because this is a story of a man looking for the right paradigm. He was in the paradigm of what he grew up in Lansing, Michigan. Then he was in the paradigm of the Nation of Islam. Then he's a paradigm of prison. And then when he sees the truth for what it is, he's unstoppable. He's like a wali here in our land. So with Salman al-Farsi, he's now in Syria. Then he's like, wait, I heard there's something going on in Medina. How do I get down to this place between the two lava tracks? And he's giving up his life to find the truth. Because even with Christianity, there's something like nagging at him. So he goes to Medina. And when he goes to Medina, then he hears, oh wait, the Jews are talking about this prophet, and now he's got this inkling, maybe it's him, and then the Prophet Islam makes the hijrah, he's like spying on him, is it him? We know the story, he tries to offer him charity, and the Prophet Islam doesn't accept it, and he's like, this is it. My journey, who knows how long, 10 years, 20 years? He's been searching for the right paradigm, and he's testing, because he's a person of truth. He sincerely was a Christian. He was a sincere Christian, wanted it to work so badly, but it just wasn't working. And then when he sees the Prophet Islam, something clicks. And now he is all in it. And now this is just the end of that story, which is my favorite part, is at the Battle of the Trench, right? We all know Salman al-Farsi for the story of the Battle of the Trench, right? He's the one who's like, oh, this is what my people did. We dug the trench. And the Prophet Islam was like, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Now one of my favorite stories in the Sirah, they're digging the trench. They're like sweating. Elbows are rolled up. Imagine saying Umar, and they're probably competing over who can like dig faster and dig wider and dig. And they're singing songs. The immigrants are singing songs. The Ansar are singing songs. There's like a lot of just pride and we're in this together. And then they start having a spirited debate. And the debate is, well, we know who the immigrants are, the Aus and we know who the Ansar are, the Aus and the Khazraj, and it's very clear who the immigrants are because they're all Quraysh. But what about that guy over there? Salman. What is he? Is he an immigrant or is he a helper? And then what happens? This was like a nobody in the sense he was just a young boy from Persia. The Ansar go and they're grabbing him. Like, no, Salman is what? He's an immigrant. Because he migrated, right? The immigrants, he's an immigrant. We're immigrants. We migrated from Mecca to Medina. He migrated all from Persia to Medina. So he's a super immigrant. And the Ansar are like, no, and they're grabbing him. Imagine, Sheikh, it's like I'm pulling from this side, and And we're fighting over because we love this guy so much. And they're like, no, he's not an immigrant. What are you talking about? He was in Medina before the Prophet ﷺ came. He's a total Ansar. Do you understand like this beautiful moment? And Salman al-Farsi is like, no, immigrant. And he's like, I'm an Ansar. And this is the guy who was just chasing, he just wanted to find the truth. And then what happens? How does the story end? How do we resolve the story? Was he an immigrant or is he an Ansar? The Prophet ﷺ comes and says, no, he's not yours and he's not yours. And he puts his cloak around him. He says, he's mine. Salman al-Farsi is of the Ahlul Bayt. Like, it gives me chills. A man from Persia. He was a space traveler. We're time travelers. Do you understand the point? The idea is that what made Salman al-Farsi so beautifully and so beloved by the best of the companions, and then the Prophet ﷺ beats them out, is because he was chasing the paradigms and he was being honest about this is what I've been up to, and I'm going to be honest about what I've been up to, but let me take a true account, and am I really playing the game that I want to play in my life? And I'm urging you all to consider, because if you think about it, why is it that the elders in our community are the ones who are fully embracing Islam while the youngsters are still playing around? Because we're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. By the time you get old, you get all this wisdom. You're like, okay, I'm both feet in, and I'm also closer to the grave. If you can have that moment like in your 20s, in your 30s, where you start having honest moments, this is why ikhlas is like the most important characteristic of a Muslim, is having the sincerity, be like, look, I need to have this moment, like, have this discussion with your spouse or with your children. Like, we as a family, are we really in this? Are we chasing, am I, like, as a dad, am I chasing my career? Am I really putting this ahead of what I want? And is this going to work out for me? Because when we look at these, you were mentioning these influencers who get up at 3 a.m. and so forth. You're looking at like, it's like they have to run a marathon and they're all just like publicizing what they do in the first mile. You don't realize by the 3rd mile they're injured and they can't even finish the race. But the Prophet ﷺ is like, no, this is a 26-mile race. I'm going to show you how to pace properly. But before we start trying to follow the Prophet Muhammad, I'm in the process too. It's a constant process of like, am I 2 feet in or not in this thing? Am I in the gym, or am I still kind of trying to do like, curls with one hand, but like kind of scrolling on social media in the other, and I'm kind of like faking the workout.
SubhanAllah. I hope that we've been able to inspire you with some questions, some considerations to go back. And we understand that everybody here is at a different time and different age and a different situation. But no matter who you are or what your situation is, the Prophet ﷺ has a lot for you. He was sent to make our lives simpler. He was sent to make a complex, complicated, stressful, worrying world into something where you can always be smiling. And the Prophet ﷺ was never seen except he was smiling. A man who went through all that he went through, he saw 6 of his 7 children die in his life. He buried 6 of his 7 children with his own 2 hands, 2 wives. He buried his beloved uncle Hamza. He buried a lot of the companions because they were martyred in battle. And despite all that pain and all that stress and all that worry, he always had a smile on his face. Well, you can have that too. If you make him the center of your persona, if you finally, you have that conversation with yourself, with your family, are we in this? And then from there you can say, let me learn the life of this man so that I can always have an answer to the question, what would the Prophet ﷺ do? Thank you all for your time. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Meraj, for all the time that you've been giving us. Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu bless your book and bless your knowledge. And after Salah, inshallah, we have sweets. That's on the house. So do enjoy, but please take only for yourself and if you're feeding your family as well, if they're here, until, so that we can make sure everybody has something. There's boba outside as well, but the boba is for purchase. Jazakallah khair. I believe there is pizza for the youth committee. Is there pizza? You think? We'll see. Hopefully there is. Jazakumullah khair. It's always a pleasure to see everyone. And we'll go ahead and do adhan, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. So sorry. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
استووا عباد الله، استووا استقيموا إلى الصلاة يرحمني ويرحمكم الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum. Two quick announcements. Inshallah, tomorrow we have a community potluck. There will be activities for the kids, so bring the family and please bring a plate or some food with you. Again, the potluck tomorrow starting at 5:30. There will be a bunch of activities for your little ones, so please come out. It's going to be a blast. Also, next week, starting Friday, is the beginning of the OCIF intensive seminar. Right? We want everybody to participate. It's not going to take up all of your day, each of these days. There's flexibility, but we do need to make sacrifices for our deen. We need to revive the culture of learning Islam, especially here in South Orange County where it's pretty much non-existent. Right? So come, bring your family. There's free childcare for your children. And if you have a 10-year-old, this will be relevant to them as well. So I'm expecting everybody to be there. We're doing this with a bunch of speakers to provide you with maximum benefit. Again, this is starting this upcoming Friday. The flyer's outside. Registration is free. Childcare is free. So, inshallah, nobody has an excuse to say, I can't come, or I'm excluded, or I can't participate. Register so that we just have a head count so that we can make accommodations accordingly. Wa jazakumullahu khairan.